Hello, everybody. Welcome to this edition of the What's Next podcast, where I have the pleasure of actually welcoming a friend, Liz Wiseman, to the show. I'm just going to read a little bit about her because if you don't know about her, I'm not sure how that's possible, but let's start here. She is the author of the New York Times bestseller Multipliers, which is a fantastic book. The Multiplier Effect, and the Wall Street Journal bestseller Rookie Smarts. She's a former corporate exec who now works as a management researcher, executive advisor, and the CEO of the Wiseman Group. But Liz has also received the Top Achievement Award for the leadership from the Thinkers 50 group, which I happen to be on, but I'm 50. She's been numero uno. So has been consistently named one of the top 50 management thinkers in the biannual rankings. So welcome, Liz, to the show.
Well, Tiffany, it's good to be here. And, we would be colleagues, not only friends and associates through our work, but we would have been colleagues if I had taken that job working for Salesforce. I worked at Oracle and, Mark starts Salesforce and there was an opportunity to go there, but I didn't do that. But we would have been then an additional dimension to our relationship.
Oh, that would have been great. Well, everybody who's joining us across all the platforms, please share where you're joining us from. This is a global opportunity for us to get together with Liz, and post your questions if you get a chance. But I want to begin by just getting us to impact players, because there is a natural, I feel like, progression, having read all of your books, that we started sort of with Multiplier and worked our way forward. How would you sort of describe that process for you, and then what landed you here to impact players? And oh, by the way, I have the book. Go pick it up. So what would you say?
Well, I'm an independent researcher, so I get to work on things that I'm curious about and I'm interested in. And it started with, why is it that some leaders seem to utilize all the intelligence around them and others diminish it, which is what led to this book, Multipliers. And as I continued to do this work, I realized what we're trying to do here is create a high contribution environment. That's not a very exciting name. That doesn't make the list of super sexy content, but it's kind of what it is how do you create a workplace where people can show up and be their whole selves, and I don't just mean emotionally whole. I mean, use their whole brain, not just left side, right side, all of their insight, intelligence, creativity. If I've learned anything studying leadership, it's that people all over the world come to work wanting to contribute. And when their leaders see that capability and use it and grow it, use it to grow the business, work is exhilarating. It's thrilling. It's fun. But that when people come ready to contribute, but their bosses don't see it or use that intelligence, work is exhausting. And so I've been looking at, what do the leaders do that cause some people to be able to play big and to, have a lot of impact in their work. And then you get to a point where you realize it's not just the role of leader that shapes that. It's also the way that the contributor shows up. The way they work matters as well. And that's what really got me to this work is, what are the mindsets and practices that really impactful people use? And how can we kind of show up in a way that is more whole by using some of the mindsets and practices of these impact players, people that I came to call the impact players?
Yeah. And a lot of it it's not just the people, and you kind of alluded to this, but it's the mindset. And there's been a lot said about that. And, I agree. And I feel like change is hard, especially personal change. I always joke, January 1st, New Year's resolutions, January 10th. What were they again? I totally forget. Change for humans is hard. And so when you think about impact players, maybe you can start with, how do you define what that looks like? But then if you feel like you're listening to how Liz is describing it, wow, I don't really do that, how would you suggest someone begins on this journey?
Well, so the essence of the research is, we went into 9 organizations. Salesforce was one of those. And we asked about 25 managers in each company. So it's 170 total. Tell us about someone who is smart and capable and hardworking and doing well. And I ended up calling them ordinary contributors. They're kind of like rock solid contributors. Then we asked the managers to identify someone who was smart, capable, hardworking, who was having an enormous, inordinate, extraordinary kind of impact in their work. And then we looked at the differences. And here's in essence what we found. The first thing I was struck by is how managers describe these ordinary contributors. They do their job. They do their job well. They follow direction. They take ownership. They are focused. They carry their weight on teams. Like, wow, that seems like kind of an ideal team player. They were stellar in ordinary times. But the thing that really made them different, the impact players different, is that they were stellar in times of uncertainty and chaos, which is where most people fell short. Like, I'm doing great, I'm on fire, and then things start to get wobbly. And then, like, I give it to the bosses to worry about. And in those things, there were 5 circumstances in particular that these impact players handled very differently. All of these fraught with ambiguity and uncertainty. The first is how they deal with messy problems. Whereas most people like do their jobs and do it well, the impact players, they don't just do their job, they figure out the job that needs to be done and they do that. Like, they serve where they're needed, not these like artificial boundaries called job descriptions. The second is what they do when roles are unclear. Like, we're working together, but we're not entirely sure who's in charge. Where most people tend to wait for role clarification. Oh, I need the bosses to like give me like a racy kind of a thing, like who's responsible. The impact players just step up and lead, but they don't insist on staying the leader. They provide their like term of service and then they fall back onto the team. They step up, but step back with the same kind of ease. The next thing that we saw is how they handle like unreasonable obstacles, like stuff completely out of your control. Ordinary contributors take ownership, but when things that are unreasonable, unprecedented drop in, they tend to escalate those, whereas the impact players, they maintain ownership throughout. They pull in reinforcements, but they stay in charge all the way through to the completion of a project. In some ways, they're people who like get senior executives working for them.
Wow. All right. Yep.
I think that's maybe one of the reasons why I've liked to really stay in charge of things when things get tough, because it's clear I'm going to need a lot of executive reinforcement and help. But I'm like, oh yeah, now I got the bosses working for me. This is great. Versus, oh boy, this is out of my pay grade, bump it up and let the top bosses handle it. And then, the next 2 were how they deal with like moving targets. Like, the project you're working on, the objective is changing while you're in process. And, most people kind of stick with it and they focus on the goals, whereas the impact players are constantly recalibrating. Okay, let me adjust my aim. And lastly, how do we deal with, situations where the workload just is heavy?
Right.
And, do you carry your weight and do you ask for help when things get really hard, or do you make work light for everyone? And we find that the impact players are they're easy to work with. They make hard work easier. And we can all use a lot of that right now.
Yeah. I mean, there's so much to unpack in what you just said. And I feel like the first thing I'd say is, if you heard that list, okay, so now what? A lot of it, I felt like, okay, if someone was saying that to me, would I feel like I had early in my career, would I have the confidence to do some of those things? Like, just thread it through, right? Keep ownership of it, not escalate, because I'd be afraid I'd make the wrong decision and then it would come back to bite me, right? So if I'm not confident enough yet to feel like, well, I can do that, or I'm not very self-aware and I think I can and I can't, right? I mean, I think that there's a spectrum of, if you hear that, can you over pivot to thinking I can do all this, I'm an impact player, or I don't have the confidence to be one? Where do you think people should begin, and how would they uncover where they're beginning from?
Oh, well, I think, being an impact player, I want to make sure it's like, let's talk about what it's not.
Okay, let's do that.
It's not a superhero. And I might start with that one, because I feel like I'm constantly telling the people I work with, which is like, there's no superhero here. Like, there's nothing special about me. Like, I struggle with things too. So it's not like I'm an impact player, meaning I can't make mistakes. I've got to shoulder all the burden. I've got to get it done. I'll like throw myself on this, get across the finish line and collapse exhausted. It's not that they're taking it all on. It's about where you point yourself. And it really starts with this orientation of, are you doing your job or are you doing the job that needs to be done? And, doing the job can actually lead to a lot of burnout. Like, okay, I'm just cranking it. I'm doing what I'm supposed to do versus taking the time to understand what's important here. What's important to our customers, what's important to our stakeholders and the senior leaders, what's important to my team, and then working on the things that are the most important. So it's like, I'm going to take the energy I have and I'm going to point it towards things that create value. I'm going to look for those opportunities to add value. So it's not about like exhausting yourself.
Right.
And I think there's some important implications for burnout because, we're dealing with this epidemic of burnout right now. And, there's so many people who are working hard, but feel exhausted. And, based on what I've learned studying these kind of high contribution environments, what I found is that what people find exhausting is not doing a lot of work. What's exhausting is having too little impact. Where we're working hard, but not making a difference.
Or they don't know they're making a difference and they're working hard.
Right. Yeah. And this is, I think, one of the challenges of remote work. And, Tiffany, you and I were talking about this in our own work is right now, I think people are struggling to see the chain reaction of their work. Like, I know, like sometimes I'll give a speech out into the internet and I pour my heart out and I'm like, I have no idea what you are doing with any of this. Like I'm giving and I feel like this just might be evaporating into the ether. And I was talking with my son-in-law about this. His name is Josh, and he's kind of new to the workforce. He's a financial analyst inside a tech company. And he's like, man, I'll work so hard on a report. It's not about the hours, but I want to know where it goes.
Right.
Like, and it's so easy working remote for people to do their job. Like, okay, I needed that analysis. Great. Now I do this. And if we're in a shared workplace, we might say like, oh, by the way, Josh, you know what? That report, killer, so good. You know what we did is that helped us make this decision and that decision, or we come out of the meeting and we stop by and say, that analysis you did, that made that decision so easy for us. It became so clear what, we should do with that data. And we go like, wow, my work matters.
Right.
Like someone's doing something important and useful with it. And when we work remote, these chains get broken. And we end up working hard, but not seeing we're not seeing the value that we are creating.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. I think one of the things that I've been spending a lot of time on is understanding this kind of employee engagement and when and why and how employees are engaged versus why they aren't. And I consistently hear almost what you just described about Josh, right? It's like, I did this. I don't know what happened to it. Did they like it? Did they hate it? It was an emergency. I worked over the weekend. I did it. And then no one said anything. And because maybe they're running hard and fast and they didn't take a second to go. And maybe, unfortunately, they didn't even look at it. So it was an emergency on Wednesday. By Friday, when you're just, done with it, they didn't need it anymore. So I feel like, do you think that managers, leaders, because I know you cover this in the book, they're able to sense the difference between those who are impact players and those who are kind of just checking the box, but then they don't know how to articulate, how do I create an environment where I can raise the level of visibility to those to help them feel like they are making an impact, so that it becomes that multiplier effect, to use your terms, right? Of all of a sudden, because if this is your words, right? Multiplying zero is still zero. So you kind of have to get that output from people. But I think everyone, and the Great Resignation, I think is a great example of, if you don't feel worth, don't feel valued, you don't feel you connect with the brand, you're leaving.
Absolutely. So here are the things I know for certain, and then I'll get into like some things we're still learning about. I know for certain that two things about managers and their orientation to impact players. Number one, they know who their impact players are. And people often have, as people start to read the book, they're like, oh, like they see a sorting exercise. Like, I can tell you who the impact players on my team, because these are people we turn to in clutch moments. These are people who we know, they may not be the strongest or the fastest player, but like it's a game critical moment. Who are you going to put in? Who do you know is, first of all, paying attention to what's happening on the field, understands the gravity of the moment, and can be counted on to make the play and to play as a team and do the thing that's going to secure a team win rather than a glory moment. Managers in the workplace know who these people are because they're their left hand and their right hand. Like, these are the people I turn to. They don't always know why. They just know, like it's a je ne sais quoi, like I trust them. And that's what I tried to do in this research, is decode that. Like, what is it that they're doing? The second thing I know is that managers want more of them on their team. Like, that's a very natural reaction, which is, oh, okay, yeah, oh no, I know who my impactors are. I would love it if I can get my entire team to work this way. So, well, if you're a manager and that's the case, well, what could you do? Well, you could get rid of the rest of the people and hire a bunch of impact players.
Right.
That's an option too, is you can try to sort of like take this decoded sense of here's the thinking and the practice that goes into this and share that across your team. It's very doable. Or some combination of both of them, because there's parts of the mentality that are a little easier to coach and train than others. So you may want to hire for the least coachable kinds of mindsets and behaviors, and then develop the rest and spread it across your team. To do that, of course, you need starter talent, very much like sourdough bread, where like if you've got a starter agent, like you can spread that. And so you need a couple people with that mentality to get things going. Or you can do the simplest thing, which is to help the people on your team see the impact of their work. Like, get this chain link going again. Like, the very simplest thing a leader can do to get more impact players on their team right now is to help people see where their work is going.
Right. Agree. Yep.
Help them see what's most important. Like, these are the things that are most critical to us. Point your energy there. And then this thing you did, here's where it went. That's the value it created for me and for others. And if we can get that chain reestablished, because it's been broken in the pandemic. People are like, I don't know. I'm just like typing, sending my work off into the ether.
Yeah. And I'm going to ask this question because I think, do you think it's a good idea to have a full team of impact players? Like, let's say you have 10 people on your team. Is the goal really to have all 10 be impact players?
Well, let's explore that. I think that's a fun question because, like, okay, could you have an entire team of impact players? Okay. If the impact players are like superstars, big contract kind of people, like these are the people like that you're putting a lot of resources behind, and they're prima donnas. No. And here's one thing that was surprising about the research. It's part of the research process I love, is like figuring out what you thought would be true that isn't true at all.
Right.
And I have to tell you, it was one of my suspicions, or perhaps a little bit of a worry, is that of the 170 manager interviews, each one identified one, in some cases more, but one impact player. So of these 170 people who were creating extraordinary value and building extraordinary influence and doing work that mattered and had meaning, I figured some of them were going to be some brilliant jerks. And we went back and looked through all of the data, all of the transcripts on this, and there was not a single one that I would say was a prima donna, like an all about me. Like, okay, team, you exist to serve me. Like, your little supporting roles are really just to prop up me, the diva. There weren't people like this. Now, they might have had diva moments. And I've had, diva moments early in my career where I thought it was about me and learned it's not. These were all people who were there in service to the work and to the team. And they were They were standout contributors. Everyone knew who they were. They were highly respected, revered even, but they weren't, they were serving rather than being served by the team. And, they weren't bullies. They weren't, people who won at the cost of the team. They weren't people who played big but made other people feel small. And they weren't actually high maintenance in any way. They were easy to work with. And so, like, would you want an entire team of people like this? I think so. But it also it necessitates that the leaders realize that it's not just the people who are out in the most visible roles that can work and play this way. Like, it's easy to say, okay, people who are selling, like the elephant hunters, of the sales world, or the people who are on stage or out in front of customers or seniors. Like, you can actually think and work this way from behind the scenes roles. And it requires that we realize that, it's easy for some people to go missing who may be in, I don't know, introverts, or maybe in quiet roles, that actually their work can have extraordinary impact.
Right.
Or people who are in underrepresented groups who want to contribute but don't see the opportunity to do that, or are doing all the right things but aren't being seen. We're like, in some ways, they feel invisible inside organizations.
Well, what's interesting is there's a great comment here I'm going to show you from Jillian. She said, people can be different types of impact players, each with their own specialties. And so almost what you just said, right? Those that are very seen versus those that are maybe more introverted or quiet in their roles, but still have tremendous impact. And so I think it's important that impact does not mean type A, out there, everybody hears them, knows them, sees them. It's that they really have the ability to have that huge impact. Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And we have a question too. We have a question as well. So here's a question from one of our friends, Laura. Would love to hear the distinction between impact players and servant leaders.
This is a fun one. LGO, it is so good to see you on here. She's one of my favorite thinkers out there. So, like, a servant leader is like, my job is to provide for the needs of the team that I lead. That's like maybe a bad representation of servant leadership. There's absolutely a servant orientation in these impact players. It's not like I'm going to be a neutral servant of the group, like anything you want, I'm here to serve. They work in service, but they work in service to what's most important and what can create the most value. So, like, this is the case you want to be careful not to fall in a trap of like group think and, okay, what does the group want and how do I serve the group? And these aren't people who make work light for others by taking on other people's work. Like, oh, your workload's heavy, I'll do it.
Right.
These are not martyrs. They're not martyrs. They are looking for where are the highest value opportunities, and I'm going to work there. And I'm going to serve the work, I think, more than serve the team.
Well, so do you think some impact players, I'm going to ask this for a very specific reason, but do you think some impact players that it's misunderstood that that's what's driving them, the impact? That some people may feel threatened by that impact player or feel like it is all about them, or, that it's at the expense, that maybe they're feeling insecure that they might not measure up to an impact player. Do you think, am I off on this? Or do you think sometimes that impact players can be misunderstood?
I don't know about that. What I know is that they are deeply respected inside their organizations from everything that I could see. Now, obviously, I can't see into the places I'm not asking about, but, we found, certainly their managers have a deep respect for who they are, and they very much acknowledge the team. It was one of the things I noticed as I'm like, okay, like that was a great interview. Now I'm going to write something about you. And they're like, oh, well, that changes everything. What are you going to write? And it was funny because in the writing process, I had to convince so many of these people that I called impact players to allow me to write about them, not about the contributions made by everyone on the team. They're like, well, but Joe did this, and Sunir did this, and Sarah did that. And I'm like, well, but I'm trying to focus on you right now. And they're like, yeah, but there are a lot of other people. I'm like, yeah, I know that, but I'm trying to focus on you right now. I'm trying to isolate down what is it that you're doing. They're team players. They're team players. Now, that's not to say that a few haven't had moments where they've had rough edges. And there were several who were like, yeah, I kind of got beat up early in my career. And someone was kind enough to say, hey, by the way, it's not about you. And I had my own moment where, one of my managers and senior leaders and mentors was like, Liz, kind of get over yourself and like make yourself useful here. And it reoriented something in me.
Yeah. And I think, today with people working remotely, and if you're listening to this in the world, we've got someone joining us from the UK. So, people are in various senses of lockdown, opening back up, back to the office, working from home kind of thing. And as we stay in this hybrid, and you've mentioned this a couple of times, right? The chain being broken, that worries me. Like, I'd rather have the chain being stretched than completely broken. And so, as this reshapes itself over the next 1 to 2 years on kind of what the future of work will look like. And when I say work, I mean kind of office teaming work, not work as in the jobs being done. What can those listening who may be impact players to sort of take everyone along for the ride, and also pull up others. So you've said something. So let's say you're an impact player and someone on your team is doing some work and it has huge impact. And so you can, showcase that and say, Bob did this work, or, Sumit did this work, whatever it is. And I'm going to say, this is what the impact was. This is what they did. And people go, oh, it's safe environment. Or they tried something and it didn't work, but that's okay because we learned a lot from it. Once again, making it safe, but also raising up others that have impact that maybe the rest of the team, because the chain is stretched, is not aware of that. Is that a good thing to do in this kind of new normal we're living in?
Well, okay. So if we want to work on a high impact team, like that, there's a job of the leader, but each team member could do something about that, starting by creating safety. Like if I can boil down almost everything I've learned about what great leaders do is they create two conditions that seem like they're in contradiction, and they create them in equal measures simultaneously. And that is safety and stretch. Like, safety, so people feel the psychological safety, intellectual safety, like you belong here, your ideas matter. I'm going to make it easy for you to speak truth to power. All the things we do to create it, like, it's okay for you to step out of like these narrow confines of your job and the hierarchy and like where you feel straitjacketed and say like, we actually hired you for your intelligence and we want you to use it. And it comes in diverse forms. That's the safety part of the job. The second part is stretch. Like if you've worked for someone who's all safety, no stretch, you know that this is boring, demeaning, like, yeah. And this might be because I grew up at Oracle, where it was a little bit of like this sort of delightfully hostile work environment.
I have no comment.
No comment about that. We were accused of eating our young, but like my bosses stretched me. But I think I felt a lot of safety. But it's like, you don't want to work in a place that's all stretch, no safety.
Yeah.
Meaning, hey, you know what? I expect this of you. I'm going to hold you accountable. Here's the high thing. I have these high ambitions, high expectations, but I haven't created a safety net for you to attempt hard things. Like that's debilitating.
Right.
But all safety, no stretch. That's no fun either, where someone just puts their arm around you. Hey, Liz, we appreciate you. Good job. I'm like, yeah, if you appreciated me, you would appreciate my capability and my insights and my potential. And you would ask me to do something hard. And then you would respect me enough to hold me accountable for that. So I think this is the fundamental job of leader, is to create the safety and stretch that people can do important and hard things. But this is a team culture as well. And there's things that we can do to provide that safety for each other, but then also a little bit of stretch, like, okay, let's take this to the next level. Hey, like what if we did something remarkable here? And I think we can also celebrate the assist. kind of like in sports where, we record the person who scored the goal, but we also record the assist. Teams are usually great about celebrating the goals, the big wins. But, what if you just always added the assist to it?
Right.
This is the person who worked behind the scenes, who set this up so that you could make that play. That goes a lot to making sure that everyone can contribute.
Yeah. And I'd say from a lesson learned from very recently, I sort of was communicating something and I shared the assists, which were critical to what it was happening. And we didn't get anything back to sort of acknowledge the assist, and I was disappointed because I felt like I did that so that, you're trying to raise visibility for those impact players, to your point, that may be sort of silently in the background. But, as we wrap this up, I want to sort of leave this on kind of, people have heard this, of course, go get the book. But if you want to become a, more impact player, a greater impact player on your team, if there were sort of 1, 2, or 3 pieces of advice you could give someone, if they could just do, one thing on Monday morning and one thing on 30 days Monday morning and one more thing 30 days Monday morning, what would be the steps to sort of raise their visibility as an impact player?
I think if you want to get on the path of impact or increase your impact wherever you are, I would start with this mentality, which is figure out what's important to the people you work for. Whether it's a customer, a stakeholder, an internal, stakeholder, an external, a boss, a team, figure out what's important to them and then make it important to you. Easier to say, harder to do. It's about subordinating what you want to work on, like that pet thing, to say, I'm going to find out what's most important and I'm going to work on that. And that puts you on a path of impact. A second thing you can do, as we found, that the arena that distinguishes the impact player mindset from the contributor mindset is uncertainty and ambiguity. And it's, do you look at messy problems and unclear roles and unforeseen obstacles, all the things that are like micro challenges, everyday challenges that you find everywhere? Do you look at them through the lens of threat? Like, oh, that's a distraction from my job. Like, that's going to keep me from working on what I was planning on doing, or that's an inconvenience. Or do you see those as opportunities?
Right.
And that is like probably the most powerful thing yet you can do, is look at all of these situations that we want to back away from. Like, oh, that's a mess. I'm going to leave that to someone else, and say, where can I find an opportunity to add value? You're in a leaderless meeting. Instead of going, someone's got to figure this out. It's like, let me use this as an opportunity to serve, and let me be the leader that this meeting needs, or the leader this project needs. Big unforeseen obstacle. How can you use that as an opportunity to rethink how you do things, or to get senior executives involved, but not pass it off to them? So those are probably 2 things I would do to kind of kickstart the mentality.
Well, excellent, Liz. I could talk to you all day. You're one of my favorite people. And thank you to all of you for joining us today, and for the great questions, and for LGO joining. So if you haven't read her book, Limitless, I'll give it a little plug since she's on with us. But how can people stay in touch with you and your work? And, obviously pick up the book at all your favorite retailers, but how can they keep in touch with what you're doing?
Well, let me see. On social media, at Liz Wiseman on Twitter. I'm pretty easy to find on LinkedIn as well. And anyone who wants to connect with me on LinkedIn, I think you can do that with my email, liz@thewisemangroup.com. And let me see, the wisemangroup.com website, impactplayersbook.com. It's all I'm pretty easy to find. So,
well, if you had never heard of Liz before, I hope that this was inspiring for you to understand how you can show up every single day and be an impact player. I think it will change so much about the joy you get out of work, and how sort of inspired you are to sort of bring others along with you. So I thank you, my friend, humbly, for you joining me today on the What's Next podcast. Thank you, Liz. Thank you all for joining. We'll see you again next time.
Thank you.
Take care. Take care, everybody.